Today I'd like to talk about anxiety. And in one way, anxiety is a subject which we might imagine everything that could be said about it has been said about it, and we're just going through the same old rigmarole. Here we are again talking about anxiety and talking about this and that and flight or fight, or the release of adrenaline, the release of whatever other things. And anxiety is a subject that's been done to death, and yet, remarkably, there's nothing really useful in anything we ever say about anxiety. It sounds great in a way. It sounds like we're providing information. It sounds like we understand what we're talking about. But the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and none of our guff about anxiety helps anyone, least of all anyone who happens to be anxious. I remember noticing this, or I remember it becoming clear to me on the very first anxiety management class I sat in on, not as a facilitator, but just as a potential would-be co-facilitator. And so what I remember is the fact that there's all this information, ludicrously, including, which seems to be quite high up on the list of information, are you an A-type personality or B-type personality? Because that could be important. And that's kind of weird because, okay, suppose you are whatever, an A-type or a B-type. What the hell are you going to do about it anyway? Is there a way to switch from A to B or B to A? If one of them is more anxiety prone, which one is? The A-type, I think. Not that it matters, because it doesn't matter. So, and then there's information about how the release of adrenaline can cause this, and the heart can go faster, and you can get sweaty, and all of that, which has a very rudimentary kind of value in the sense that we can recognize a physiological response. We can think, it's okay, I'm not dying, it's a physiological response. But then what I came to realize is that there is this belief that if we just provide people with all that anxiety, then they won't be anxious, as if it's only because they didn't know that stuff, which obviously means they must be unnaturally dumb. They didn't pick it up like the rest of us. But if we provide them with the information, then they don't need to get so anxious anymore. So that is a real model of mental health. It's called the information giving model. Give people information about their condition, or what we understand to be their condition. However deluded our understanding might or might not be. But information doesn't help anyone. We're addicts of information, and we're well used to accessing information. But when it comes to something like anxiety, all the information in the world is no use at all. Information is crap, really, beyond that very rudimentary level of, okay, I know this is anxiety or a panic attack, and it's not actually a physiologically dangerous situation. So that's helpful, but only in a rudimentary way, because it doesn't go anywhere beyond that. It just stops us being quite so frightened, but we still will be frightened. And in addition to the information giving, there is these kind of little tricks that we're taught, little things, little stuff. Oh, do this. If you're anxious, do this, do that. And I won't even bother going into what the things are that we're supposed to do, because they're all equally nonsensical. The whole concept of giving people things to do when they're anxious is nonsensical. And the reason for that is quite simply that if I'm doing a thing in order to help me to not be so anxious, that really is nothing more than a manifestation of my anxiety about being anxious, which means that I'm going to do the thing anxiously because I'm anxiously trying to fix my own anxiety, cure my own anxiety, free myself from my own anxiety. So of course I'm going to be doing the thing in inverted commas, because we're not going to say what the thing is because it doesn't matter, anxiously. Now, suppose it was possible to do the thing not anxiously. So I'm anxious, and then someone comes along and says, here's the thing, do the thing. And I think, okay, or I say, okay, and I go ahead and do it non-anxiously, then maybe that could help. But the snag there is if I'm able to do that non-anxiously, then I'm not anxious. If I can turn my anxiety off like that to do a thing in a relaxed and non-anxious way, then I'm not anxious. Because when we're anxious, we can't turn the anxiety off. And when we're anxious, everything we do partakes in that anxiety, embodies the anxiety, and carries on the anxiety to the next situation that we create, which is something that Krishnamurti says, whatever state of mind we're in, all of our actions come out of that state of mind and they further it. They certainly don't loop back to that state of mind and free that state of mind from being itself. So that's kind of a basic principle. I can't get rid of my anger by being angry with my anger or by doing angry stuff. And yet, if I am angry, everything I do will be angry. I can't turn the anger off. If I'm feeling sad, if I'm feeling really bad, then I can't get rid of that by rejecting that sadness and feeling bad about feeling bad. They go, God, I'm feeling bad. So someone comes along and they say, okay, let's do some kind of therapy type thing. And I jump on board that because I don't like the feeling bad. So really, I'm feeling bad about the feeling bad. So that's not such a well put example, but it's the same kind of thing that we're using a negative state to cure a negative state, or a neurotic state of mind to cure a neurotic state of mind. So what I'm just trying to say is that these handy little things that we supposedly do, they only serve one function as far as I can see, and that is the function of giving the therapist something that they can imagine they're doing that's helpful. So they have a role, it gives them a role. And I suppose I could also concede the fact that if I'm the anxious person, the patient, the client, and if I want to buy into that, I can think, yep, this is going to work, so I'll feel kind of temporarily better about that. But all this stuff is very, very dumb. It's incredibly superficial and it's incredibly dumb. And I think the reason for this, and particularly with anxiety, the reason that we're so obtuse in relation to anxiety is because we are in the West, and the West is no longer just the West. The West is expanding to cover the whole world in terms of this paradigm of thinking and behaving. In the West, we're very rational, purposeful. We really, really value rational, purposeful type stuff a hell of a lot. We take it for granted as being what tells us who we are and how we know if we're well, if we can do the purposeful stuff, then that makes us feel good about ourselves, and it's like an indicator of stuff's going well for me because I can achieve my goals. Basically, that's our thing that we think is great. Doesn't matter how stupid those goals are or how destructive, really, because on the whole, it has to be said that our goals in Western society are very self-destructive goals. They don't help anything, really. They just, essentially, our goals are just there to provide us with a transient burst of euphoria at a cost, which we will ignore and keep on going for the euphoria hit by whichever means we can: entertainment, social media, jockeying for position in terms of social hierarchy or social status, accumulating stuff, whatever kind of garbage it is, that's what we do. So with anxiety, because it affects our ability to be confident in achieving our goal or our confidence in being able to control effectively, this seems like an utterly horrific thing. It seems to strike at the very core of us. And of course, in one way, it obviously does, because when we're anxious, we can't do the things that we need to do in life. So we do need to do things purposefully in life. We can't get away from that. But that doesn't mean that the part of us which is purposeful and that action by which we exert or assert our will effectively is the core part. It's a part. But in the Western world, we've made it the core part, the be-all and the end-all. So there is a core part of us which is completely got nothing to do with how good we are at controlling, and how well we are able to control doesn't really make any difference with regard to this core essence of who we are, which isn't anything to do with controlling. So because we do think controlling is so important, we jump overboard, really. We go overboard in the attempt to fix it and do something about it. It kind of, go so far as to say it scandalizes us and horrifies us to think, oh no, gosh, it's not possible to. In anxiety, we lose our confidence to do things. It kind of there's a shocking thing for us to consider, and we rush into the fray, trying to fix that instead of looking at it a bit more closely. Now, it's possible to say, and it is potentially a good thing to say, I think it could be a good thing to say in terms of making things clearer, that anxiety essentially, forget about adrenaline and all that stuff, even though it comes into it, has to do with a very, very fundamental loss of confidence with regard to our ability to control effectively. But, so that's the first statement, and that isn't a controversial statement. Everyone will agree with that. But the second statement is that that isn't really as pathological as we think it is, because our well-being oughtn't to be tied in with our ability to control effectively. And if it wasn't, if our sense of well-being, of being okay, wasn't tied into our ability to control, then anxiety wouldn't be the thing that it is, because I would have a core of feeling okayness that wouldn't be affected by how well I am able to control it. My whole well-being would not be resting, in other words, on this thing about how good a controller I am. Some of it might be, in practical terms, it would be important, but I wouldn't be getting my well-being tied up with that, because my sense of well-being will be coming out of somewhere else that's got nothing to do with controlling. And we can proceed from that statement to talk a little bit about why controlling is so central, why it's so important, why it seems to be so connected to our very existence. And that has to do with the idea of how we perceive ourselves. And in general, in very basic terms, we can say that there is a tendency operating in the universe, in the world, to get us to perceive ourselves as being an isolated or separate identity or entity. Very strong tendency to get us to see ourselves this way. And what produces this strong tendency is our reliance on the thinking mind, which splits everything up into categories, concepts. So it's only natural, and more than natural, it's inevitable that the thinking mind will do the same to us as it does to everything else, and it will turn us into a concept or a category or a little parcel, a little tied up parcel with a little bow on it. And that's the me parcel. That's the identity. So the problem with that is that as soon as we think we are the identity and operate on that basis, we cut ourselves off from the source of our, I could say inspiration, but it's more than inspiration. It's the source of everything we do. Doesn't really originate in the controlling self-concept or ego. It's not something that I think of and then do. Generally speaking, when we live our life, it's a thing that happens through us. It's a spontaneous thing. So I don't have to be responsible for it, which is a big thing for us in the West, making the right decisions. Have you made the right life choices, etc., etc., etc. Which can feel good in one way, because if we make all the right decisions and things are going well, we can take the credit and feel good. But then that flips around, so when things don't go so well, we have to take the blame and feel bad, which isn't great because we're already feeling bad. So then we have to blame ourselves for feeling bad as well. And that's pretty much how we are in a nutshell, really. We blame ourselves for feeling bad. So if we could understand that it's only when we have separated ourselves from everything else and created this situation, or experience ourselves as being this isolated self, that all the responsibilities on us, whether what happens is good or whether what happens is bad. I have to bear all that on my own shoulders, and that was never the case. If we had to know how to live life, and we had to actually know it ourselves and enact it ourselves and go through all the steps ourselves, we would grind to a halt within seconds, because we don't understand naturally anything about what it means to be alive or how to live our lives. But despite the fact that we don't understand it, we can all do it. And the reason we can all do it is because I don't have to understand it. We don't have to understand it. It's not a personal responsibility. And this is essentially just another way of looking at things, which is looking at life from the point of view of spontaneous action rather than directed action. So in the paradigm of directed action, anything that needs to be done, we have to do it. I have to do it. It has to be done by the effective controlling agent. Otherwise it won't get happen. So that way of looking at things comes out of the thinking mind, because the thinking mind can only ever understand things in terms of isolated concepts or categories. It can't understand the unified view where there are no isolated categories, and so everything is involved. In every small step, everything is involved. We can't break things down into little units, which we can then understand and string these units together in a kind of linear fashion to understand what life is, because everything is involved in everything else. Which is, it might sound a bit messy, but it isn't. That's just how things are. Everything is everything else. The categories that we place so much stock on are arbitrary projections of the thinking mind. But when we try to live on the basis of these projections, things get very, very difficult, because we've cut ourselves off. So, for example, a good example of that is to think about the situation where we are being what's called creative. I could be writing a little poem or story or a play or something like that. Now, if I imagine really strongly and totally believe that I am an isolated agent who has to be personally responsible for thinking of everything that goes into what I'm writing, now, it may be the case that I can write some stuff, but it will also be the case that what I'm writing will be utter crap, tedious crap. Okay, so maybe I can turn it into a bestseller all the same, but it will be tedious crap. That isn't creativity. Creativity is when I'm not responsible for it, as anyone at all in any form of involved in any form of creative endeavor will, I'm absolutely sure, will agree. it's not us that does it. It's not the isolated self, the conscious ego, that does all that stuff. We merely become a conduit, as simply as that. And that's how all good stuff gets to happen, all genuine stuff. When the self-construct has to manufacture stuff off its own bat, on its own as an isolated entity, all it can ever do is reproduce itself. So it can trot out its ideas again. Essentially, it's duplicating itself. So this is a virus-type behavior. The self-construct can only ever replicate itself. It might imagine that it's being creative when it's doing that. Often it does imagine that, but it's just passing itself on, repeating itself, copying itself, duplicating itself, regurgitating. And that's pretty much what we're taught in the West, is to regurgitate stuff that's we've been told, and then we regurgitate it, and then we get told, well done, you've behaved like a good virus, you've viralized stuff, you've virally copied stuff and reproduced stuff. But the problem always comes back to this thing that, although it can feel good to imagine that we are the author, that I am the actual author, it's actually me, I did that. That can feel good, but it can feel very bad. Because although I can take credit for it, I am taking credit for stuff which isn't really mine. There's a Zen saying like that about bandits stealing the gold that was rightfully meant for the emperor, and they hijack the gold, or the people carrying the gold, and take it for themselves. Say, this is my gold now. That's what bandits do, of course. It's the whole point of being a bandit. That you take it by force and say, it's mine now. And that's fine. But when you're talking about the ego, or the self-construct, claiming to be the author of the one who does the stuff, that works for a little while and you get to feel good, but it comes back on you because you're taking credit for what is not actually yours to take credit for. So that'll turn sour later on. But what I'd like to kind of tie this up to is the idea that when we are suffering from anxiety, which is due to us taking too much responsibility for our own authorship or agenthood, and not realizing that everything that happens just happens through us, and we don't have to do it consciously and deliberately. If we can just let it happen, it will happen. So what that means basically is that we can't cure or help anxiety by getting better at doing stuff, by having better improved methods, because this idea that it's us doing stuff is the root cause of the problem in the first place. So the only thing that is helpful is to see clearly that this separate business, this separation business, isn't as great as it's cracked up to be at all. And even though it kind of might seem fun in the first stages, where we can be the ego basking in the glory, which isn't really it leads to a very bad place later on. So if we can see this clearly, we can also see where the answer lies. And the answer lies in seeing through that separation. And once we see through it, it's no longer there, because it's only there because we said it was there and believed in ourselves, basically. We sold ourselves that idea, and then we believed the idea. So it's not that we need to do anything, but just to see through the false ideas that we have automatically taken on board without realizing, without reflecting on it at all. Okay, thanks for watching.